Ja, meine Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zur letzten Mosse Lecture in diesem Wintersemester. Mein Name ist Lothar Müller, ich bin Teil der Gruppe, die diese Lectures veranstaltet. Sie sehen mich hier in einem Raum, der aussieht wie White Cube. Das ist aber der Senatssaal der Humboldt-Universität, und wenn die Kamera laufen könnte, dann würde sie Ihnen jetzt Wilhelm und Alexander von Humboldt an der Wand zeigen. Also wir sind in unserem gewohnten Raum. Sie sehen hinter mir die Ankündigung der Reihe, und neben mir, wenn alles klappt, sehen Sie A.L. Kennedy, den Gast unserer heutigen Veranstaltung. A very warm welcome to London, A.L. Kennedy.
Thank you. Ich freue mich, danke.
Zorn, Geschichte und Gegenwart eines politischen Affekts, so heißt unsere Serie in diesem Wintersemester. Und im Mix von Formaten, den wir unter den aktuellen Corona-Bedingungen ausprobieren mussten, ist dies der Typ eingeschränkte Anwesenheit, aber dafür live. Also Sie sehen jetzt A.L. Kennedy, wie sie live in London sitzt, und mich hier in Berlin. A.L. Kennedy, we are very glad that you join us this evening. Und sie wird gleich ihren Vortrag halten. Danach gibt es ein Gespräch mit ihr hier aus dem überwältigend leeren Senatssaal der Humboldt-Universität. Das wird auf Englisch stattfinden, ohne Simultanübersetzung, aber vielleicht mit knappen Zusammenfassungen auf Deutsch zwischendurch. Und Sie selbst können über die Chatfunktion auf YouTube Fragen stellen, die wir dann in das Gespräch einbeziehen können. Aber zunächst a short introduction. When we planned this series of Mosse Lectures in 2019, we had an idea what the impact of anger as political emotion could be and why it could be important to reflect on it. In the meantime, we learned that this reflection was even more urgent than we had thought. Two of our three guests till now came from Germany. Johannes Lehmann analyzed rage as an alarm system for politics in modern societies and emphasized the historic dimension and the metamorphosis of Zorn and Wut in German, anger and rage, from old Europe to nowadays. While anger is deeply rooted in the Old Testament and as holy anger one of the attributes of God, modern societies since the end of the 18th century experience what one could call a rise of rage. Perhaps not so much in the real history of emotions, but in political rhetorics as a legitimizing force of rebellion and disruption. Ute Frevert, in her lecture Edler Zorn und Wut im Bauch, showed that anger and rage as political passions or emotions are not a raw material waiting for being exploited, but that anger and especially rage have the artificial dimension, that they can be produced, formed, designed. A.L. Kennedy is really a specialist in exploring strong feelings in private life and political sphere as well. One of her collections bears the title Rage. Perhaps it was not just by chance that our guest from Israel, Aaron Ben-Zeev, professor of philosophy in Haifa, offered a positive view on anger as a legitimate force of self-defense against powerful, overwhelming forces within parliamentary democracy, threatening to undermine civil rights and the equality of citizens in a modern secular state. One of our patrons in this room is Wilhelm von Humboldt, who in his theory of languages developed the concept of, in German, Weltansicht. Weltansicht, the view of the world, does not mean Weltanschauung. It is more fundamental than any idea or opinion. It is just the form in which we perceive the world through the lens of a specific language. Language, of course, does not determine thoughts. The cosmopolitism of languages is merely the cosmopolitism of Weltansichten. The German words Zorn and Wut have their counterpart in the English triangle of anger, rage, and fury. Writers are experts in the field of Weltansicht, and that's why we are very glad to have A.L. Kennedy with us this evening. She is Scottish, born 1965 in Dundee, which means that she was 7 years old when Edward Heath signed the contract of membership in the EU for the United Kingdom. She is one of the most productive writers in contemporary English literature, a great storyteller and novelist, and really a specialist in strong feelings. All the Rage, I mention it, is the title of one of her collections, and since the long tale Gleißendes Glück was published in 2000 by Wagenbach in Germany, she has many readers here in Germany. One element of her success here is that she had an excellent translator from the beginning, Ingo Herzke. Her German was until now. Gleißendes Glück. The English title was Original Bliss, which of course is surrounded by the original sin. And you learn much about the art of A.L. Kennedy by reading the sad, but not only sad, story of Mrs. Helen Brindle, whose marriage is, to put it mildly, a sort of hell, and who experiences a very strange sort of redemption. She is an expert not only for female perspectives in storytelling, A.L. Kennedy, of course, but also a specialist for raging bulls. 20 years ago, she published on bullfighting, which is not only a wonderful book on Spain, Federico Garcia Lorca in Spanish words, but also a story about an attempt of suicide seen from within. The elements of a corrida she named death, transcendence, immortality, joy, pain, isolation, and fear are not only the essence of bullfighting, they are the essence of A.L. Kennedy's writing as well. She is a filmmaker, dramatist, and columnist for newspapers. And it is not the first time she gives a Mosse Lecture. She was our guest in June 2013, and if you were in the audience then, you will remember the lesson, that a lesson can be delivered in form of a stand-up comedy. Of course, she's a stand-up comedian as well, and the following year, there was the failure of a Scottish independence referendum, and then in 2016, we had the Brexit decision, the beginning of a grueling process of separation. In 2020, A.L. Kennedy wrote as a foreign columnist for the German daily newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, watching the last month of this process and commenting. The title of this series of articles was, in German, Affentheater. And the least you can say is that the person who wrote this series was not very fond of the present government of the United Kingdom. Many of us are curious to learn what will be the outcome of the Brexit, not only for the relationship between Great Britain and the European Union, but also for the United Kingdom itself. A.L. Kennedy, I think, is not just curious to know, but perhaps furious to know. And because she's a specialist for the triangle of anger, rage, and fury, we are very glad now to listen to her lecture. Again, warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here. And I hope you're all safe. So, this is my lecture, my talk, which is called One More Thing, which we will get to eventually. Full disclosure, I am Scottish. Among the UK's racial stereotypes, we are supposed to be the angry ones. Our disunited kingdom's national cliches run Northern Irish, terrifying drunks, Welsh, singing drunks, and Scotland, the angry drunks. The English, they get to be polite. And of course, we have all manner of racist cliches which we apply to those beyond the pale of whiteness and the ways in which they are hysterical and really need beating into order by white hands. And I will be coming back to racism. Britain is apparently unable to avoid coming back to racism. Racism was at the heart of the Brexit project and is at the heart of the Tory party project, the far-right English nationalist project, just as it was at the heart of the British Empire. The empire our current leaders long to raise from its dishonourable grave. You can't have an empire without other countries' people being less human than your own. Now we have banished ourselves from the European family. And from Ireland to Africa to India to China to America, we're looking for allies. We face other countries' memories of our empire's theft, deception, arrogance, and brutality. The world sees us coming and is not necessarily impressed. Meanwhile, even as England, sweet England, green and pleasant land, is distorted by the ranting of bigots, eugenicists, paranoiacs, and racists, all the people who have to sound furious to be in any way credible, still that accepted cliche for Englishness remains polite, white and polite, as depicted in Asterix books and World War II movies back from the time when we weren't the Nazis, and in countless European jokes. Polite. Even as we in Britain all become poor England first and most residents of Plague Island, still polite. I wanted to tell him to wear a mask, but I dream about storming Parliament and punching them all until my arms are tired, but still polite. I wanted to tell him to stop shouting at that woman wearing a hijab, but, polite. Even the swastika-tattooed drunks who were screaming in our streets in happier times, even the brain-class warrior drunks in Parliament overseeing 100,000 excess deaths of us, they're somehow polite and no adverse comment should be made. I would have insisted on knowing the details of the legislation for Brexit, but, polite. People who will still eat their dinner, even if it's just rats on fire. They have practiced a tolerance so extreme that extremists are now in power. Why? How? And where is the anger? As a Scot, I look on and am at the very least bewildered, as do many, many bewildered English people. The majority of English people who aren't enjoying being sautéed in the fever dreams of a strange new nation built from incompetence and cruelty. That new country oscillates between being a solitary English ethno-state and a greater England which eats Britain. Back to the empire. And Britain is shot through with other fault lines of cognitive dissonance, a bundle of increasingly disparate nations controlled by a pseudo-aristocratic London-based elite which imposes untenable contradictions and injuries so that our self-images begin to shimmer and deconstruct. This is a particular problem for England and the English because they have so few ways to step outside the savage identity being arranged around them like poisoned barbed wire. They aren't Irish, they aren't Scottish, aren't Welsh. Although Englishness is famously a thing of mingled ancestry. We are an island. English people can opt out of the madness by being from the north of England. They can be from rebellious English cities like Manchester and Liverpool. They can be Cornish Celts, which will result in the government punishing and or ignoring them, but still, that they remain English and therefore walk beneath a flag stolen by charlatans and thugs. And this is not a unique experience. Many countries go astray, swept along by cults of purity and exceptionalism. Our public discourse remained convinced that an English-British cult of purity and exceptionalism wouldn't end in the shambles that everybody else has had because, well, we're trapped inside a cult of purity and exceptionalism. So every day we feel both abused and surprised about it. This underlies successive other shocks. The UK COVID vaccine seems not very good. Our ability to vaccinate, not very good, and was then sabotaged by our government and is now worse. We may impose upon the world a vaccine-resistant strain of C19. You're welcome, world. And the government has used the pandemic to muzzle Parliament and avoid scrutiny. More and more evidence suggests that an anti-Semitism crisis targeting an opposition leader who wasn't an anti-Semite in order to ensure an incompetent Old Etonian adulterer and author of an anti-Semitic book has succeeded in making him PM. Now it would seem the racist and anti-Semite, potentially PM, is in charge of us and sitting at the head of a party happy to dog whistle about Soros and to ally itself with the AfD. It's too much. I'd like to imagine the delicate and intelligent, mysterious human mind as something like an octopus. And then I think of someone taking that tender, inquisitive, complex interaction of tissues, instincts, and intelligence and giving it an electric shock. With that octopus. Every morning we wake up happy, pause for a beat, and then remember. Eton, drunks, bigots, end of democracy, Russian influence, Facebook, death toll, AfD, malignant narcissists. Octopus, 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 we are the octopus. We keep on getting shocked. So why are we not noticeably angry about that? Is it politeness that's constraining us? Really? Is it weakness, cowardice, fear? There's certainly anger around more than ever, but some of it seems groomed, channeled, manipulated, given a script. Some targets are permitted, others really are not. So what's going on? Are we being suppressed by stress? Do we not want to add to the chaos and threat already in place and the sheer, constant, grinding weight of that? We and our loved ones could die horribly at any time, and the person in charge of our safety is a maladjusted 5-year-old wearing some kind of unconvincing adult human suit. He can neither construct nor understand sentences. He transforms all important information into incomprehensible word pate, while actual details are leaked to a docile press increasingly distrusted by the public. Stressful bad news is hidden under chaos, along with the corruption and ineptitude, which are also stressful, because they are literally life-threatening. And we can't demonstrate about life-threatening incompetence because the life-threatening incompetence means we can't go outside. Stress, of course, makes human beings especially vulnerable to psychological manipulation and prone to poor decision-making. Our Prime Minister's favourite advisor, Dominic Cummings, fired but still lurking in the shadows, was formerly a prime mover behind the Brexit and is obsessed with psychological manipulation. Second-hand KGB techniques for undermining stable societies managed to deliver a yes vote for the Brexit, a disaster in itself. Now, at a time when we need to be united as never before, the manipulations continue. And is this insanity, stupidity, treason? Yeah, all of them. The Brexit campaigns weaponized racism as a wedge issue. They threatened the white working classes with job losses to the brown and foreign. The NHS, an organisation significantly underfunded by the British government and significantly staffed by brown, black and foreign people, was portrayed as being ravaged by invading hordes and starved by EU budgetary contributions. The racist resentment of our fading ruling classes in a post-colonial power overwhelmed our media. But there was more. Somehow, Brexit wasn't just going to be a chance to ignore all the rules that keep us healthy and safe, because public school survivors hate rules. it was going to somehow turn the clock back and transport the entire island through time. The race for Africa would start again. The race we won because no one else at the time had automatic weapons and artillery. Ian Duncan Smith, arch tormentor of our disabled friends and neighbours, and time travel enthusiast, praised Brexit thus: "I wish I was 21 again. My goodness, what prospects lie ahead of us for young people now to be out there buccaneering, trading, dominating the world again." It's a very bad impersonation, but he does not deserve a good one. Invade and occupy me once, shame on you. Invade and occupy me twice, no, you don't get to do that. Why are you even trying? Are you a drunk 5-year-old in an adult suit? We are now, like the US, a textbook case in psychological manipulation as applied to a Western democracy. Differences have been deepened and amplified, as have our weaknesses in governance, our stalling social mobility, our failing social contracts. Surviving in safety as a functioning alliance of nations, with food, clean water, medicine, and utilities, have become a furiously politicized preference rather than a basic necessity. Troll farms, bot armies, Cambridge Analytica and its like, a decomposing public discourse, the collapse of the BBC into partisanship. In Parliament and pubs and living rooms and streets, we are now just a series of fights, a pulse of various angers. Not polite. While we reeled under the lash of an imposed austerity so damaging it was condemned by the UN, and tens of thousands of our disabled and poor died before their times, we were encouraged to hate health and safety. Absurd, right? But only the impolite would object. And our British media are based, other than for tax purposes, not just in polite England, but in the southeast of polite England, home to advanced sadomasochistic politeness. A decade ago, we were being encouraged to hate the disabled. Next, we were encouraged to revive the empire mindset, our hatred of brown foreigners, Muslim foreigners, and then all foreigners, and then opponents in the Brexit debate, a debate saturated with raging hatred, which briefly turned on High Court judges as enemies of the people. Fear was created and became rage. More recently, transsexuals are being targeted with smears and scare stories about bathrooms infested with penises. And now we must hate doctors, nurses, lawyers, teachers. Imagine. Doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers are the enemy now. All of the people the public trusts more than politicians and journalists. We are Lear now, crownless and raving mad on the heath in the storm. But still, where is the resisting fury? Civil society endangered, where is the rage? Our press is almost entirely controlled by a tiny cabal of millionaires, and all the main titles share an advertising gateway. So our pro-millionaire government is rarely questioned, no matter how many it kills. Our late-developing underfunded indie media still has little influence. With a virus besieging us and our front pages telling us that war is peace and freedom is slavery, many of us feel alone, with large feelings, large thoughts. What use is fury when maybe no one else is angry? The silent majority, an idea capitalized on by President Nixon so he could claim that support for his crimes was just inaudible, appropriated by the 45th president, appropriated by my prime minister. It's there to say the status quo is here to stay. It isolates dissidents, and rage turned inward can become despair, especially in a time of great despair. A population which put 2 million on the streets to protest Brexit, which fielded the highest weekday demonstrations ever to protest a visit by the 45th president, which protested during the pandemic when organized by BLM and XR, is being told not just that it's docile, but agreeing with all this. The UK has invaded and occupied itself, overwhelmed centres of communication, imposed sanctions, and is rapidly destroying its economy and democratic norms. Post-Brexit legislation promises to grant even more power to our government, while slashing scrutiny, checks, and balances even more. The former US president did untold damage to a country with a strong constitution. We have no constitution. Brexit was a dry run for MAGA, of course. We've been drinking the poison of groomed fury for a long time now. And I have to echo Gabriel Sterling, voting system implementation officer for Georgia, speaking just after the 2020 US presidential elections, a man at that time realizing the fury of others, roused and shaped by those contesting the presidential defeat of the 45th president, had already produced death threats, thinking that it might get people killed. He said, it has all gone too far. All of it. Later, he simply said, it has to stop. When he spoke, his voice shook with his own anger, raw and fresh, rooted in a desire to defend people other than himself, controlled anger, articulate, and facing something else, what we might call engineered anger, constructed anger. He may have done some good. Likewise, the Clark County official who let a Trump and possibly barbecue-anon supporter scream himself out and wander off before he simply returned to business with a, where were we? In the face of performative rage. They were too late, of course, to prevent the attempted coup. Even they couldn't quite see coming the fury of a mob live stream invading government offices with zip ties and terrible intentions. Or the later 5 deaths and the following suicide. Rage, fury, anger, that whole palette of emotions has been key in our downfall. Not just its polite absence, but its manipulation. Because anger is attractive. Not just Scots. It feels so true and righteous, doesn't it? One moment you're part of society and other people matter and have rights. And the next, all those social restraints, courtesy, all that subtle lubrication of human interactions, we kick that aside and we are buccaneers for sure. And if we're told to despise the very things that we find inconvenient and grating, to hate those who disagree with us, it is gloriously freeing to plunge into a hot soup of stress hormones and get raging. Adrenaline makes you breathe more, see more, feel more. Your heart is pumping fight or flight energy into your muscles. Cortisol is leaping through you and screaming about tigers and spiders and existential threats. You are a new you. Anger is a superpower that you don't have while you're queuing nicely and following the speed limit or wearing a mask because casually killing strangers isn't something you generally do. The rush of oxygen and sugars to your brain sets it hamster wheeling into high alert. Not to help with complex thought, just to prepare you for animal action. Anger sets us beyond logic, or our thoughts for the future, our understanding that actions have consequences. We bathe in simple primate urges and deny reality. I won't get arrested for this. I won't crash my car. She won't divorce me. I should get this tattoo. I am not too drunk. I won't ever wake up tomorrow and be forced to regret today. Anger is like alcohol, but anyone can drink it anytime, no glass, no charge. It's like love with a hammer in its pocket. And it stops all that endless, stressful thinking. So, of course, politicians with no answers or terrible answers need you to join them in fury. Take that leap into seeing red. There's a reason my Prime Minister, Popo the Death Clown, does poorly in House of Commons that isn't a baying bear pit. If you can actually hear him, he has nothing to say. He mumbles now as an effort at disguise. The 45th president is notoriously incoherent, but he knows how to surf waves of emotion, how to lean into loathing and fear. And there's a reason the Bundestag has had its most cantankerous year, with the AfD settling in and trying to raise the emotional temperature. Nothing to say, or only terrible things to say. Provoking anger is what someone uses to lasso others down to their level. There's a reason people really believed that holograms and JFK Kennedy Jr. back from the dead would somehow prevent this week's inauguration. They got angry because Biden eats children, and they stopped thinking. Don't mistake me, I am clearly not above anger, and I used to love it. As a tiny child trapped in my parents' not good marriage, I realized anger makes you bigger. You could fill a room if you want all eyes on you, everyone wondering what the hell you'll do next. Let your muscles heat and tingle, clench your fists. It'll happen all in a moment. And then just open your mouth and howl. My anger achieved nothing, only that momentary high, cooling on me to be more furious the next time. Alone and calm, I knew I'd been howling because I was threatened, powerless, tiny. I was scared. Now, we're all threatened, powerless, and tiny. That's reality. We're already scared. And what if my media and my leaders never leave me alone? Never let me be calm. Which is why this lecture, as I said right at the beginning, remember? It's called Just One More Thing. Because I got there eventually. It's a reference to Columbo, my communist grandmother's favorite TV detective. The rumpled, 100% successful investigator is an example to us all. He is insulted, condescended to, lied to, and threatened. But he never gets angry. He keeps thinking. He keeps on finding out facts and then acting appropriately upon them. He is doggedly assured in his moral course and in its justice. And eventually, those who sought to outwit him and provoke him get angry. And they fumble. And they fail. Yeah. Columbo is an example to the world. As is his catchphrase, the one that people my age still remember, and that you can see on German T-shirts, I've heard. Just one more thing. Nur noch eine Sache. He's walking to the exit, apparently misled, made a fool of, even mistaking a cupboard door for the exit at one point. And then, as is his catchphrase, nur noch eine Sache? As if it's nothing. But it's everything. It's the key to understanding. The one that lets truth be true again. Like Dorothy Day, the Catholic human rights activist, he is someone who is living as though the truth were true. Now, we live in a world where Columbo's values have been turned upside down, and we flee from moral aspiration and facts and embrace insults and lies. We elevate the noisy, empty, quite often men. Our just one more thing is what Columbo always avoided. Anger. Permanent, escalating rage. Rage can seem ennobling, justified, necessary, righteous, but it's always just one more thing. It always follows other emotions as a cover-up, as a reaction. We get scared, hurt, threatened, stressed, and we flee those humiliating emotions and reach out for anger instead. Offered a convincing threat, our systems cease complex thought and prepare, as Rudy Giuliani might put it, for trial by combat. Our media helped begin the process in the UK, as elsewhere, perhaps innocently, by realizing that we are still animals built to pay close attention to threats. So if the news is mainly threats, we pay close attention. One step beyond that, and the truth isn't true. We are fed imaginary threats. Because if headlines are all, water gives you cancer, government may ban sex, opposition could legalize burglary, mobile phones make you pregnant, you pay attention. But if the threat doesn't escalate, we get habituated and we drift back off to loving our friends and family and being normal and having lives. And the press need our money, not our happiness. So then we get the headlines that began the slow destruction of any medical or factual consensus in the United Kingdom. Water cures cancer. Water gives you cancer. More cancer than previously thought. Diet of only water saved cute blonde little girl with leukemia. Which is terrifying, because it's terrifying, but also because it's confusing. Once it was far too late, some figures in broadcasting regretted opening this particular Pandora's box, but it was bound to escalate beyond their reach, and the media were bound to seek out politicians so threatening and stressful and confusing that they could provide constant thrills, both for those who drank their Kool-Aid and for those who stared in horror. Double win, but not for democracy. And meanwhile, the escalation continued, and our UK press reached to activate the key mindset in the makeup lying dormant at the bottom of an empire power, albeit a busted one. The racism. Refugees are coming. Refugees are here. Refugees are taking your jobs. Christmas made illegal. Sharia law in your bathroom. Black fingers are touching your ready meals. And if you end up believing that your hatred of others is equaled by their hatred of you, then your world is terrifying. And you have to get really angry to feel big. And you have to stay angry, or you'll remember that refugee athlete you like, that black singer, that Muslim footballer, your really nice Hindu neighbor. Anger means the absurdity of racism will elude you, and the power of its collective fury will sweep you up in fix after fix of rage. Remember, weapons of mass destruction ready in 45 minutes. Terrifying. Wasn't true. The case for invading Iraq was based on fear-inducing lies and fury. The 45-minute claim was a distortion of how quickly someone could deploy a gun. Swept along by fear after 9/11, fear of WMD's, fear of brown people thinking brown thoughts. We dived into the expressions of anger, which are war and murder and abduction and torture. And we terrified and tormented a generation. And their fear and fury created a response. We created a refugee crisis and a terrorism crisis that has become the sum of all our fears. Because we got scared and stopped thinking, grabbed that one more thing and made forever war. And wars get instant money, like pandemics. Once you start them, some people don't want them to stop. As a Scot, lost in a disunited kingdom, watching the triumph of wickedness, epidemic harm, epidemic fraud, epidemic bereavement, and my government can't even give us a vaccine the way it was intended because there's no because. My Prime Minister hurt my mother. He took her on-time second vaccination and made her cry. Yeah, I can see the attractions of fury. And as a Scot and an adopted Glaswegian, I realise that our forms of address are easily interpreted as fury. I have been perceived as angry when I have not been. maybe see me as an anger expert. The story of Scottishness as anger is maybe an educational one, as is the myth of the British Empire as politeness made international. Clearly, you can hear me, I don't have a Scottish accent, because it can leave me struggling to be in every sense understood. For you, my fellow Europeans from a happier land, it's easier if I use standard English. But equally, in our handful of nations, it's been decades since our whole variety of accents was heard and appreciated in our mass media. The last time we were fighting a world war and actually had to appreciate and motivate everyone so we could survive and, with the world's help, win for democracy rather than empire. We were a very different place in 1945 than we were in 1939. Nowadays, we misunderstand each other. The Southern Irish are funny or advertised drink. The Welsh are mostly ignored. The urbane Scots accents are used to give financial advice in banking adverts or to explain things, because Scots are supposed to be not just perma-furious, but tight-fisted and autistically insistent about reality. It's an empire hangover from the days when Scots were expected and trained to be useful administrators and noticeably poor. Beyond that, we're expected to be incomprehensible looming presences who make everything sound like a death threat. In part a hangover from the days when we served the empire's armies and the days when we were battling clans with Highland charges. And I get it. Scotland is the land of Robert Burns. Our key national celebration is for a poet of love, but we can be hard to fathom. Allow me to demonstrate. I fond kiss and then we sever. I for weal, alas, forever. Deep in her-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. I mean, am I going to kiss you or murder you or maybe both, and in what order? When we are not singing, "Who are you, ya skilpert wee bow-headed naff? Come here and I'll gie you a birdie." That's a compliment. Suddenly I join Groundskeeper Willie and Shrek and Scotty from Star Trek and that bizarre Australian from Braveheart in being someone who is permanently skilled and yet enraged. And the engines will not take it, Captain. And I'll mop your blood up from the inside. And they will never take our freedom. And this is the part where you run away. We are terrifying maintenance men and women for the world now. Even our place names are menacing. Clayslaps, Twicker, Hurley Hawken, Falconers. And more disturbing, for some class distinctions and politeness get mangled in Scotland. Gaelic speakers are no respecters of status. They really do have a sense that everyone is family. It's what clan means. All on the same oar in Gaelic, rather than in the same boat, working together rather than just being in the same place. Geese had to be used in Victorian Glasgow to stop the underclasses walking along nice streets and making fun of them. Glaswegians still speak to anyone about everything: their feet, love life, children, weeping, skin conditions. For someone used to social stratification, this feels invasive, transgressive, aggressive. Liberty riots broke out across Scotland at the time of the French Revolution. We hosted a number of more and less fabulously unsuccessful rebellions against Hanoverian rule, rife as it was with institutionalized violent prejudice, incompetence, and corruption, which reminds me of nothing currently happening. It could be said that Scots stand relatively close and overshare. We make eye contact as if we have full human dignity. And yes, when we do all of this, we may be uttering sentences which could be the directions that you need to that museum or things we'll do before we disembowel you. Probably the former. And the better we know you, the more we are likely to subject you to enthusiastic yet loving verbal abuse. Like many other peoples, we use the nuance and architecture of fury without the lack of thought. This is perfectly possible if you know it is an available option. We are the country of Jekyll and Hyde, of paganism, Catholicism, Protestant sects so strict they don't countenance wearing corduroy on the Sabbath. We were among the first nations suppressed by the empire and among its first enforcers. The Highland Charge repackaged to suppress other unruly natives. We are a place of dualities. It's taken a long time to recover ourselves from endless contradiction. Within my lifetime, we were famous for fury on the football terraces and grown men angrily singing about dead fishermen and heroes. We were in pain, afraid, almost overwhelmed by one more thing. But we were healing. We are healing. And we already lived in a culture where appropriate anger is usually allowed to arise and dissipate, and where many still are amateur anger virtuosos, experts in non-physical, verbal aggression, where you need to be thoughtful to survive a spoken contest, quick of mind and tongue, able to earn respect when none is automatic. Like many countries, including England, we Scots once had a tradition of what we called flyting. You may have come across this if you're an aficionado of Assassin's Creed, but it's something else. Flyting was a kind of verbal duel practiced by Celts like me and Norse people like me. People who weren't averse to physical violence, but who needed and created alternatives. The Anglo-Saxons and the Old and Middle English writers understood flyting. It's a duel, but a word duel. It could turn violent, but it didn't have to. In 15th and 16th century Scotland, flyting was an entertainment, approved of by kings, even though it was absolutely obscene, involving every sexual and anatomical insult imaginable and unimaginable ones also, and in every other circumstance you could be fined or flogged for profanity. But flyting was blessed. Live, perhaps at least partially, improvised poetic entertainment. And I am proud to say the earliest recorded flyting, which took place before King James IV of Scotland, was between poets William Dunbar and Walter Kennedy. It included accusations of heresy, theft, threats of execution, and Kennedy was described as being a living death's head, a dwarf, and someone who loved horses in wrong ways. After that, flyting became really popular, a manifestation of anger pulled away from mindlessness. Now, in the sometimes violent, certainly highly stressed communities where rap is popular, rap battles are a new old form of flyting. Communities that realize they can't withstand the endless storms and losses of fury move into something else. Communities that aren't dominant work out how to effect change beyond fury because their fury would bring about entirely crushing backlashes. Yes, if you're a peaceful BLM supporter, you may still get hit by a car. But at least that violence becomes your force multiplier as you resist. Your violence will always have higher stakes for your community. White people can, of course, attempt an armed coup and then walk back to their hotel. And I am going on about our multiple race problems all over the world, but for as long as we indulge white violence as an expression of white dominance and male dominance, we will have an indulged rage problem, a media rage problem, a politics rage problem, and we surely must see how far those problems have already gone. And we may be coming to terms with indulged and monetized rage, because in the US and the UK and around the world, a new generation has risen up who seem to be peacefully and intelligently interested in peace, equality, climate justice, and the simple right to stay alive. In the pandemic, we've all had time to think about what we need and what we deserve and whose allies we can become. And meanwhile, people who would never normally be touched by indulged rage, powerful people, senators, white people, have seen it threaten them, felt it strike them. It was always going to eventually. Those who long for a fantasy version of civil war, the inevitable playing out of rage, have been disappointed. But if their hate continues and continues to be indulged, they will not. Either another war of distraction or another civil war will appear and be embraced when we have no strength to spare. Strength to fight C-19, strength to rebuild after the pandemic, strength to save our planet. Anger is a distraction. Keep staring into its flames and we will all die. The culture wars will end culture. So please, take it from Scott. You can borrow the energy of anger and put it to positive use. You can rise to anger's provocation with something other than anger. You can practice, for example, flighting. I know politicians, the worse they are, the more they want to be taken seriously, to be important, to have gravitas, to be credible. There are many ways to destroy that. Among them, it is possible to remold them, reframe them through flighting. Words, the power of the powerless. They can cheer us while we insist that truth is true. But they can also sting and destabilize the image of those who want power. To demonstrate, I might say, theoretically, who knows, not in a legally binding or real way, if I was someone who was governed by the Bundestag, and bear in mind, the governing party of my country is now allied with the AfD, as I said, I might say to myself and others, Bernd Baumann, the face you'll see looking down at you when you wake up in a car boot and the lid lifts. Peter Böhringer, the man trying to sell you hair dye that really does cure COVID. Stefan Brandner, empfindungsfähige Kartoffel. Markus Bühl, the waiter fired for doing wrong things into your chicken dish. Jürgen Braun, hobgoblin with the least convincing hair in politics. Matthias Buttner, haunted egg. Peter Bistron has always looked like this and he's blaming you for it. Tino Hrupala, sales assistant most likely to pester your mum. Joanna Kotar, staring numbly at reality but still baffled. Gottfried Curio, the man your dad said you should never speak to if you saw him hanging around the back by the bins. Markus Frohnmeier, never leave him alone with your shoes. Alexander Gauland, these glasses make me look credible. Albrecht Glaser, they fired him from the morgue and he's not saying why. Wilhelm von Gottberg, man old enough to know this shit never ends well. Kay Gottschalk, delightedly confused by spoons. Armin Paul Hampel, you can't stop him singing karaoke because he is not drunk. Mariana Harder Kuno, she is thinking of how you would look if all of your parts were in a different order. Carsten Hilser writes his speeches in super big letters because it's manly. He does not need glasses. Martin Homan, don't look in his freezers or his cold dead doll eyes. Mark Jongen, he has to teach you geography, but he's only ever going to mention the countries he likes. Martin Hess, really? Martin Hess, whose best friend at school was called Rudolf Bormann? And Udo Hemmelgarn, consistently voted man most likely to be called Udo Hemmelgarn. I mean, it doesn't do anything. But it annoys creatures of ego, and one of them might work, might can. It can tilt the media against them. And it's enjoyable while we work to make things different for democracy Like many people, I am tired, beyond tired of the tiny lost souls who long for balconies and parades, who tolerate mass graves, maybe want them. I could be angry. I could start and never stop. I could spend every waking moment looking like Francis Bacon's screaming Pope. Or, to be more technically correct, Francis Bacon's study after Velasquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X, one of a series of paintings in which a pope is endlessly smearing upwards and downwards in a never-finishing burning hell of fury and fear. Fury and fear. It's the blurring. I could look like all 50 of them. But I don't. Because that would make me stupid and I need to be clever. It would let fear defeat me when there is so much else for me to defeat. No one of goodwill now has time to be a victim. The malignant narcissists of the world, the little souls, croon about victimhood to those they enchant. In a very typical rally speech of 2020, previous president told his assembled super spreaders in Georgia, "We're all victims, everybody here. All these thousands of people here tonight, they're all victims, every one of you." And it is kind of right that they're his victims. But he told his insurrectionists, "I know your pain, I know your hurt." Like he has empathy. He knows being a victim pre-justifies any and every attack you might want to make. It is a blank check for him to fill out. Lies about victimization precede every genocide, every atrocity. And to quote Gabriel Sterling again, death threats, physical threats, intimidation. It's too much. It's not right. And as lies about voter fraud continued, Sterling came out again this January to go point by point through, contradicting and correcting every lie, keeping truth true. He was trying to defend his own party, but it's still a good thing to do in face of threats, which are frightening, but anger as a response is not enough. He seems like a man who recognizes that one more thing and knows how to harness it to serve it. Like civil rights activist John Lewis, who had huge cause for fury as a black man in America. But he did better. He got into good trouble and lived his life as if truth were true. Whatever you do with that energy of anger, while you're insulted, underestimated, condescended to, lied to, and threatened, the world needs you to make it positive, imaginative. We all do get angry, but then we are allowed to use that energy, no one else. And we can keep thinking. In a democracy, we're obliged to. You have to keep an eye on those things. And that energy can help us to keep on finding out facts and then acting appropriately upon them. It's great to question and great to doubt. It improves things to scrutinize them. But at a certain point, we can be doggedly assured that a moral cause with justice is always going to be about preserving life. That wheel does not need to be reinvented. When you feel that anger rush, that heat, like me, you can take a breath and maybe hear in your head, "Nur noch eine Sache," and seek understanding and work to keep truth true. And where it has failed, work to make it true again. If we argue with truth for too long, it will destroy us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, A.L. Kennedy, for this wonderful lecture. Perhaps I will give a short summary in German, about 2 or 3 minutes or so, because then we can use the lines of your arguments for the talk. Ja, meine Damen und Herren, das war ein Vortrag, in dem tatsächlich auch wieder ein Element von Stand-up-Comedy enthalten war. Wir werden uns im Gespräch vielleicht auf die Linien konzentrieren, die ihn durchzogen haben. Sie haben vielleicht in Erinnerung, es begann mit der Selbstvorstellung von Kennedy als Schottin und eben deshalb auch als Expertin für Anger. Und eine der durchlaufenden Linien war die Gegenüberstellung dieses Typs von Anger, Scottish Anger und English Politeness. Die Kritik derjenigen Seiten an England, die zum Brexit geführt haben, hat sowas in ihrem Vortrag grundiert wie die Kritik von Zorn und Wut als politischem Kapital. Das war mit Seitenblicken auch auf die Vereinigten Staaten versehen, mit Blick auf den 45. Präsidenten, den sie nicht beim Namen genannt hat, der aber ja seit gestern auch nicht mehr im Amt ist. In dieser Dimension des Vortrags gab es Zorn, Wut und Rage als eine Art Droge. Als eine Art Droge, die die Leute größer macht, wenn sie sich klein fühlen. Und der Vergleich war vielleicht auch nicht ganz zufällig da, der Alkohol. Also Zorn als etwas beyond logic. Das war eine entscheidende Formulierung. Und die führt gewissermaßen in Regionen, in denen dann sozusagen unkontrolliert die Affekte sich politisch betätigen können. Dieses Porträt der Welten, die sie verantwortlich macht, nun für die Entwicklung einerseits in dem United Kingdom, also im vor allem englischen Teil, der zum Brexit geführt hat, mit Ausblicken auf die Vereinigten Staaten, dem stand nun die ganze Zeit immer gegenüber so etwas wie ein Selbstporträt der schottischen Seite. Und das lief raus auf den Punkt, an dem dann tatsächlich die Stand-up-Comedy stattfand, nämlich das Porträt des sogenannten Flyting. Das Flyting im alten Schottland ist eine Art Duell mit Worten. Da wurden aber wohl weniger Argumente ausgetauscht als Verwünschungen und Beleidigungen, die aber irgendwie zurückgebunden waren an eine Form von letztlich Reflexion. Und die Alternative zu diesen Verwünschungen und Beleidigungen war die Gewalt. Also die Zähmung gewissermaßen dieser zunächst beschriebenen Affektstrukturen kann man in solchen alten kulturellen Mustern sehen, die sie dann weitergeführt hat bis hin in die heutigen Rap-Kulturen. Die Ambivalenz dieser Erkundung von Anger kann man vielleicht so zusammenfassen, dass es auf der einen Seite sowas wie eine Enthemmungsdroge sein kann und auf der anderen Seite sowas wie ein legitimes Instrument für Self-Defense. Also es gab lange Passagen, in denen sie auch gefragt hat, warum angesichts all der Dinge, die ich hier jetzt nochmal aufzeichne, der Entwicklung in den letzten Jahren, unter anderem einem wachsenden Rassismus im United Kingdom, warum nicht mehr Fury, warum nicht mehr Anger und wie ließe sich damit umgehen? Und zwischen diesen beiden Polen stand nun als so eine Art Lichtgestalt Columbo, der Detektiv, der gewissermaßen konstitutionell unfähig ist, Zorn und Wut auszuleben. Und immer, Sie erinnern sich vielleicht, wenn Sie älter sind, an den noch wieder dann immer kurz vor Lösung der ganzen Kriminalgeschichte rausgeht und sich an die Stirn schlägt und sagt, da war doch noch was. Und dann kommt das, was eigentlich die Lösung des Falls mit sich bringt. Und das ist natürlich eine operative, irgendwie auch gedankliche Tätigkeit. Und da gab es dann am Schluss eine Formel, die vielleicht in die Diskussion reinführen kann, das war to borrow the energy of anger and put it to positive use. Das war eigentlich das Programm und das Projekt, auf das der Vortrag hinausgelaufen ist. And we start now with a short conversation of your topics and theses in your lecture. And first of all, I'm interested in this relationship between, on the one hand, Scotland and anger. You introduced yourself as an expert in anger because being Scottish. And on the other hand, English politeness. And on the side of English politeness, you had then the empire and sorts of growing racism. And on the other side, anger as a kind of self-defense or something like that, as a legitimate feeling. So I'm interested, first of all, in these aspects of anger as an attribute of the parts of the United Kingdom.
Oh, it's a long, complicated question. Yeah. As I was saying, we don't really understand the different parts of the United Kingdom now, so everything has become very cartoonish. And there are these sort of cliches that people reach for more and more often. And again, they're often sort of coming from journalistic cliches. And obviously it's not good for anywhere. It's not even good for a family or an individual to only understand the cartoon version of who you are. But it leads to real harm. Liverpool is a city because it's understood as a joke, and nobody in Liverpool isn't a criminal. It's really underfunded and abused, and we know Margaret Thatcher was considering just abandoning it and giving it no help at all and letting it cease to exist. A joke is a rehearsal of a reality you might like, and now we have the reality that the jokes have made. And obviously we've never come to terms with what the empire meant, what it meant for anywhere. Obviously Wales, Scotland and Ireland were the first victims of the empire, but then you become co-opted and you become part of the empire. The number of streets, even in where I used to live in Glasgow, Jamaica Street is called Jamaica Street because we owned people in Jamaica. We did a lot of trade with the Jamaican flag as a saltire because so many Scottish people lived there while owning other human beings and using them as property and agricultural tools. Scotland is beginning to come to terms with something which is very difficult and will take a long time to understand. And the Westminster mindset is to never even think about any of this, to turn back all of the historical analysis and research that came through in the 60s and 70s, and to just stop the clock on it. And it, apart from anything else, it just at a point where we have to have trade relationships, not with our 27 nearest neighbors, but with other countries. We are going to countries that we've previously invaded while presenting ourselves as people, lovely people that they've never met before. That's quite difficult. It's morally wrong. It's corrosive and toxic, and it certainly gives this huge permission for the racism that's destroying political decisions, economic decisions, political decisions like whether we deport people or not. At the moment, we're just deporting people to the West Indies who have no contacts there and no means of support there, and people die there. We're transporting people to death. Even the Victorians at least transported them to horrible slavery. They didn't just do death. There's a real unbridled ignorance and violence and lack of preparation that I've only seen reading historical accounts of really terrible places. And that stuff spreads. I mean, if you read history, it's not great, but we're being governed by people who read history and took some very odd lessons from it.
So this could produce fury and anger. And what about Columbo? But Columbo, in your talk, is a kind of secular saint. Or why do you like him so much?
As I say, he doesn't get angry, and people specifically try to make him angry, which if somebody's trying to make you angry, they want you to make mistakes. If somebody's trying to make you angry, they want you to stop thinking. It's like an instinctive thing, particularly with like a malignant narcissist or a manipulative person. They want to make you angry. We've all met these people. If you don't get angry, if you say, well, yeah, I could be, yes, that's insulting. There's a momentary thought that I'm insulted, but A, why are you doing this? Because you can't have a good reason. And B, I'm going to keep doing what I was doing, which is looking really hard at you. And I now have another reason to look really hard at you. You're not going to banish anger. But it's not the thing to act on. It's a thing to feel and think, okay, I'm feeling that. Now I'm going to punch a pillow, go for a walk, have a cup of tea, to use another cliche, and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to do. Unless somebody's on fire or somebody's, stolen your dog and you can see it under your arm. You probably need the anger then so you can run fast and get your dog back. But there aren't that many combat situations that actually are combat situations. At the moment, we all have PTSD. And you don't need that hypervigilance.
Mm. You used once the term controlled anger and on the other hand, engineered anger. What is the difference?
Yeah, it's quite, we need a good German compound word. There's like controlled by somebody who isn't you, not for your benefit anger. And then there's experienced by you and then used as an energy in order to control your reaction anger. There should be lovely, beautiful German words for that.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, also wir müssten jetzt, um das zu unterstreichen, was sie auf Englisch vorgetragen hat, ihrer Aufforderung nach ein deutsches Kompositum entwickeln, was das englische Engineered Anger ins Deutsche holt. Also ich bin nicht sicher, ob ich das aus dem Stand jetzt schaffe. Aber ich wäre sehr dankbar, wenn Sie vielleicht uns hier einen Vorschlag reinreichen würden. Also eine Richtung könnte sein, eine Zornerzeugungsmaschinerie zu politischen Zwecken. Aber da bin ich nicht sicher, ob das hinkommt. Sie haben vielleicht auch noch im Ohr, dass A.L. Kennedy ja am Schluss ihres Vortrags ein aktuelles Beispiel gegeben hat für Flighting, also für so etwas wie Angriffe mit Worten, die aber eben Angriffe mit Worten bleiben, nämlich so ein Kurzporträt der AfD-Fraktion im Deutschen Bundestag. Da werden auch Sie vielleicht nicht alle Namen gekannt haben. The next step perhaps could be this example of flighting. This seems to be a very special tradition. And when I got it right, this is an exchange more of insults than of arguments. But because it's an exchange of words and the battleground is language, it's better than violence.
I think. I mean, I would say that being stabbed is not as nice as being shouted at. I think, I think we could all agree a fight with words is better than a fight with knives. Less hospitals involved. Yeah, I mean, words aren't nothing. Obviously, they're rehearsals of reality, but it's a sort of formalized way of removing pressure, or just in, it may be between friends, if you're both secure people, because it will be funny if it's based on a truth. And if you have two people with self-knowledge, then they're going, oh, yeah, absolutely. I always look like a wardrobe that caught fire and has never shut the doors, or whatever. It's sort of a test of character. I mean, I'm interested, jokes are just jokes and clans are just clans. But if you look at the United States, which has a different media environment to ours is really a monoculture, and it's very unhealthy, as monocultures always are. If you look at vastly influential figures in the United States, you're looking at like Jon Stewart, who now literally is a political activist, was a comedian presenting the news. But his, the Daily Show, and now you've got Noah's replaced him. Those shows have more factual content because they're really entertaining, because they're funny, but people are clever enough to go, I'm going to give you more factual content than an actual news broadcast, but it won't hurt as much because it's really coated in the sugar of funny. Stephen Colbert as well. Mm-hmm. Loads of facts, really coated and funny. So you'll enjoy it. There'll be songs, there'll be silliness, but you'll get loads of factual information. We have a thing here called the MASH report, but it's not broadcast that often, and there's a huge push to make it never happen again, basically, because it's sort of using the same style of, here's a lot of factual information, very nicely packaged, but it's all quite terrible facts, which is why we're laughing, because we have laughing or screaming. There's really nothing else. And we don't have there's this sort of, we're animals, but we're a bit more than animals. So we have fight or flight, or they say, in English, they have fight, flight, fornicate. There's kind of there's an animal urge. We have another F. We have funny. If you can't literally fight, if you can't flee, if fornicating is inappropriate, you have funny, and funny can become a kind of fighting, because you can make people who've usurped the dignity of an office to make it utterly demeaned, and yet generally the consensus will continue to give them the dignity of the office. It's a way of saying, you can't really steal that dignity and make it undignified without me saying, I'm not saying the Prime Minister as an idea is a ridiculous death clap. I'm saying the person who has stolen that is a ridiculous death clap. So it's quite nuanced, but I think it's useful. And however you get your information, if you only get your information from clowns, if they're clowns that aren't lying. So it's kind of, it's an interesting resource, but it's very much feared. There's a push over the last couple of years in this country to stop left-wing comedy from happening, which is quite difficult because it tends to be anti-authoritarian. It's just a form that looks at established things and pokes them. So that's the next joy. The comedians will be replaced by people who make jokes about black people. What are they like? And we all have to somehow find it funny. Or they do an accent of somebody who's thought to be funny, which is the way comedy was when I was a child. Or we tell jokes about women. Oh, really? They're not inherently funny. Or gay people. Ooh. They used to be inherently funny. Now we've got people. They've stopped being a joke.
Now, this would mean there can be a regression in the culture of anger. Because when you describe your childhood experience from these comedies in the, say, early 70s or something like that, and now your diagnosis is perhaps we are approaching a future culture of, say, flighting, which could remind me of my childhood. Would mean there is a sort of regression, isn't it?
Well, the flighting would be the sort of anti-authoritarian response. The thing is that wouldn't get on television. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The authoritarian comedy where black people are funny just because they're black. That's it's kind of already what we've got. And that's becoming sort of larger and larger. There's a little bit that's flighting, but there's a lot that's other people are funny and white men in suits are inherently serious and should not even be looked at. Just let's look over here at a gay Irish person. Isn't he funny? Comedy is very serious.
A serious character, one could say, in your talk was Gabriel Sterling. In my view, he's a brother of Columbo in a certain sense, because he doesn't get angry really. He only said it has to stop, and he was responsible for the results of the elections in Georgia and defended the real results, despite the fact that he's in the party of the former president. So is this what you mean by controlled anger?
Yeah,
a person like him?
Yeah. I mean, you can look up Gabriel Sterling and you'll see the two speeches that he gave. And the first speech particularly, he really is angry, but it's interesting when he comes on, he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says that he's angry, and you can hear in his voice that there's a tremble, that's some kind of strong emotion. But he said, but I'm going to, he basically says, I'm really angry, but I'm going to make an effort to be clear. And it's like, that's all you have to do. It's like, know that you're really angry, but be clear. And he's been clear with himself about why he's really angry. And he's really angry because, you know, an innocent, you know, just young guy who was working on the voting was getting death threats just because he took a job working on the voting. And political representatives, people were going to their houses, people were making death threats. So he's sort of not motivated out of self-centered fear. And obviously he's standing there. Just by standing there, he's obviously inviting more death threats. So it's like, it's not self-centered fear, it's fear for the welfare of others. And it's being angry, but saying, well, what do I do? I make sure that I'm clear about why I am angry. And I tell you, because it's important. It's not just a small thing I'm angry about, it's a thing you need to know about. And I think that's a way to go forward. You know, he's an ambivalent figure. In Georgia, there's terrible voter purging. It's kind of awful. He's a representative of the same party as the president. Where does he stand on any of that? We don't know. But I mean, he seems like a man who has honor and who's thought of what you need to do in a time when something has to be done.
Ja, das war nun nochmal eine Erklärung oder eine Art Vertiefung einer Figur, die in dem Vortrag eine gewisse Rolle gespielt hat, nämlich Gabriel Sterling, der Verantwortliche für den Wahlausgang in Georgia, der sich dem Präsidenten entgegengestellt hat. Und ihn hat sie als eine Figur präsentiert, der das repräsentiert, was sie in die Formel gefasst hat, kontrollierter Zorn. Also man hat ja, falls Sie es gesehen haben, in seiner Stimme gewissermaßen den Zorn hören können, während er sich dagegen verwahrt hat, dass die Leute, die in seinem Wahlbüro arbeiten, Todesdrohungen und tätlichen Angriffen ausgesetzt waren. Und ihn hat sie gewissermaßen jetzt als eine Seitenfigur zu Columbo dargestellt, der ja auch eigentlich immer vermeidet, in Wutausbrüche oder in Zorn zu geraten, auch wenn er genug Grund dazu hätte. Und der gab ja dem ganzen Vortrag den Titel Just One More Thing. Kennedy, we talked about flighting and comedians and mentioned your writing as a columnist in newspapers. What about storytelling and anger? Because this is your main profession in a certain sense, telling stories, writing novels. And all what you explained now, has it something to do with your projects in writing stories about our world today or maybe tomorrow?
Yeah, when I started writing, I was in my from 20 to sort of 24, and then I got published. But I was working with disabled people and very poor people. And I did not myself have an awful lot of money, but I was not in any way in the terrible positions that they were in. And I had never known how terrible it is to not just be disabled, which is really inconvenient and painful and life-threatening, and maybe you're dying. But nothing helps you and lots of things punish you. And this is like in the 1990s. Now it's really much worse. And loads of people with no money, because I have no money. So I'm in the places where people with no money go. All of these other people have really never had money, never been comfortable. So I started writing because I love reading, but I never read anything that had those people in. And there was never anything anywhere that explained what it was like to be those people. And it seemed really wrong. And there was kind of fury. I mean, if I look at the movie that I made, or a couple of TV movies, or the first couple of books, that's me when I'm angry. I'm really angry. But I can't be that angry. And, you know, I'm predisposed to be a writer, but where I was writing from I was angry. So why do I never hear about these people? So the first story I ever wrote with serious intention, I sat down and I really tried was just about small people. So these are small people. These are people that you don't see. So in a way, my whole life and why I'm here and why I'm talking to you and why anybody takes anything I say half seriously is because I got very, very angry. Having been a small person, being afraid and thinking that was not good. It's like, well, nobody should be like that. And again, it's a kind of visceral rage I get with my prime minister, because it's like, no, I came from that household. Why is anybody believing any of this shit? I'm every abused wife or child in this country is going, really? I left that house. Really? Now we get this again? No. So there's kind of an instinctive rage about that. And also a kind of knowledge. It's like, no, we know what you are. We've seen that. We know that. You're a very simple thing. You're pretending to be a complicated, sophisticated, and elegant thing. But we know what you are. We can see you. And again, the comedy's good for going, nah, it's that. You know that you're that. So yeah, I am an example of, I don't know, controlled rage, not weaponized rage, it's my rage. I think maybe it's a conversation now. It's a better way to put it is say, there are people, like you have Munchausen's and you have Munchausen's by proxy. There are people now who are furious, and there are people who are furious by proxy. These people are furious with a fury that's the fury of a millionaire who might have to pay more tax, or a newspaper proprietor who isn't paid attention to by the EU, or a politician who wants to poison New Zealand because everyone there seems too happy. And it's not their anger. It's these guys' anger. It's like, no, you be you. I'll be me. So it's useful, but you wouldn't think. And obviously it takes 3 years to research and write a novel. It's not like, angry. It's not enough, but it's a push. It's a little bit of energy.
Writing a novel takes time. And what about the relationship of anger, rage, and time?
It's an instantaneous thing. I mean, I think it's almost the clue that the rage, the proxy rage is not real rage, because you can't be furious all the time. I mean, now, I'm in the southeast of England. You could walk out in a normal time when there was anyone outside. There are puce-faced people that if you say good morning to them, it's like, what do you mean? They're constantly angry. And there's something wrong there. Normally you get angry and then it goes away. Because if you do anything else, you're going to have a heart attack. Drama, really?
In your talk you mentioned Lear, yeah, but
yes,
this is a special case in a certain sense. But
although he's beautiful because he goes, he's very foolish. He's kind of I put Lear in because he's manufactured anger. He's just discontented and he throws it out as anger. And because he is worked himself up to be angry, he gets rid of his nice daughter and the other two who rob him and kill him. It's the ones who are looking after him. And he's finally becomes so furious that he goes mad. But in Shakespeare, if you go mad, that's the only sane people. You take your shoes off and you start telling the truth. And the speech on we're crazy and on the heath and there's a storm. We are not giving the speech that Lear gives, because the speech that Lear gives is all of this England was so terrible and all of this, he starts laying down truth and becomes this kind of holy fool. But yeah, I suppose the monkey wrench gang is great. That's people who are angry on behalf of nature. Really, really early environmentalist book. I suppose an entertaining kind of form of fury. Maybe Hunter Thompson. He's quite on the. He's furious, like, you know, those riffs, those poetic riffs. That's kind. You're not that angry because you can do that. I mean, some people are quite eloquent when they're angry, but yeah, he's angry, eloquent, and he's thought about it. You know, it's kind of there. It's in underneath Philip Marlowe. His little asides are actually really quite biting, and you know, there's a kind of, with that kind of noir world view. You know, it's like, yeah, you're a nice guy in a suit. You probably killed 8 prostitutes and you've got 15 illegitimate. You know, it's like, yeah, you look like that, but I know who you are. But there's a sense of humor under it too. So probably all of the noir stuff. You know, it's around. A lot of the humor is from truly seeing something and finding it distasteful. It's kind of mild anger, but it's not so mild you didn't write it down.
You had the formula in your talk, the UK has invaded and occupied itself. Yep. And we talked about the Shakespeare era. In a certain sense, this was the starting point for England to become Great Britain, the Shakespeare era. And nowadays, could it be that there will be the other way around? From the United Kingdom back to certain kingdoms, one of which would be a future England, another perhaps a future Scotland, and a future Wales, and so on. Could that be?
I mean, you would hope it could be happy. The thing is that it would leave the majority of these people completely alone with monsters. So it would be a tragedy for them. And Wales will have a border with the Kingdom of Monsters and Unhappy People, and Scotland will have a border with the Kingdom of Monsters and Happy People. Northern Ireland will be fine; it'll just become Ireland without bombs going on. I mean, our monsters, I don't think they would get it together to have a civil war. But they might. I mean, before the devolution vote and us getting the sort of slight Scottish Parliament, there were lots of scare stories in the press about Englishman goes into a pub and is insulted by Scottish people. I felt uncomfortable while buying my scones, says Mrs. Simpkins of Cheshire. There are lots of stories that are the beginning of a civil war, and they didn't push it, and we were healthy enough to withstand it. But if they do that again in the run-up to an independence vote, and they surely will because they don't want to stare at our guys, you know, it could be difficult. But I mean, we have no money and we have no army, and you don't give money to an army because that's the state. You give money to your friends for not providing PPE, or for not providing school meals, or for not providing anything. You just don't tell anybody. So it's unlikely they would suddenly have a big army in order to have a war. But it could be unpleasant. You know, it would be lovely if, you know, everybody was, if it was a nice little mini Europe. It was a sort of island alliance of some kind. But, you know, it could be like...
Last question, when will you come to Germany next time? Have you any idea?
I wish I would be there now. I'm sitting with Duolingo and learning German and French, just to run away. I don't know. I mean, your plague might end soon, and it might be safe for me to go there, but I might have to. I mean, it'd be fine. Like stay for 2 weeks in a hotel in Berlin. It'd be absolutely lovely. Before I'm allowed to touch other people, but I don't fly, so my traveling is quite lengthy, which makes it difficult in a time like this. But certainly I don't see us getting out of because we've decided to give everybody half of a vaccination against everybody's advice, and it hasn't worked as it hasn't worked in, and we don't quite know how much it hasn't worked, and who knows when we'll be out of this. But they don't want us to leave. I don't even know how if you look up the government websites, traveling, where do you want to travel to? What country do you want to find out about visas for? And you go, poof, on Germany, and it goes, we can't tell you anything. It's like, seriously? You don't even know how I would leave the country? You're just using the plague as an excuse for, I don't know. I don't know if I need documents or I don't need documents. I don't know if I need a special driving permit or I don't, or if I just can't. It's like they don't want us to talk to you because we'll remember that there's exotic fruit and nice bread and libraries. And we might want them when we come home.
I do know one thing, and that is you're very welcome here at the University, Humboldt University in Berlin for your next visit. Thank you very much, A.L. Kennedy, and I hope to see you perhaps even this year. And have a nice time. And goodbye.
Danke. Tschüss. Danke.